From Canada, Citizens Forum, where we look at the important issues of the day through a lens of democracy and media and try to figure out, how do we build a better country for ourselves? Hello and welcome to Citizens from Canada, Citizens Forum. It is Saturday, June the 7th, 2025. My guest in this segment is Chris Cook, and Chris runs a podcast, a radio show called Guerilla Radio. At the end of this segment, we'll put the information up on the screen where you can find it. And Chris, you've interviewed, I would say, prominent guests from around the world on the most important issues of the day for a couple of decades, really. And we were just commenting before we started, you know, it's like beating your head against a brick wall. Things just keep getting crazier. But yours is a very professional show. And as I said, you have guests with international reputations. So what stuff have you been covering for the past little while?
Well, thanks for the intro, Jack. It's great to be back on Citizens Forum, first of all. I remember you and I doing interviews years and years ago. And I was thinking specifically today, given what's going on right now in Gaza with the Freedom Flotilla back in business and so on, an interview that you and I did in 2014 during the Israeli so-called Operation Protective Edge, where they eventually, as it turned out, they killed some 2,200 and some odd Palestinians. And I hate to be so imprecise, because even during that interview with you, you may remember, I came with a jar of dimes and I had carefully counted out each Palestinian that had been killed during that operation up to the time we spoke. It was 1,240 something at the time, and pouring them on the table in the studio where we were being filmed to get an idea, because we can't, it seems, understand numbers. They're too abstract when we're relating them to people. So when we see 2,200 people killed during Operation Protective Edge, as the Israeli military called it, it doesn't really make that impact. But when you see dimes falling and falling and piling up, each one of those representing a life, a family, connections, hopes, dreams, the same as everyone, the same as all of us, dashed so recklessly and wantonly, it adds to the visceral effect. At least that was the hope that when I did that little stunt way back when. Now I don't have enough dimes to do that stunt again now for what's been going on since October in 2023. The wanton and planned erasure of an entire population of 2.5 million people. Still, the media hangs on to this, that this is a reaction somehow, that Israel is always reacting, as if this disproportionate slaughter would be justified in that case, which it wouldn't be even if it was true, which it isn't, of course. Now, over the years, Jack, I've covered Gaza many times. John Elmer, I talked to him dozens of times over the years, and he's gone on to Electronic Intifada now, who have been following this very closely, better than anybody in the world, I would argue, and giving insight into what it's like to live in Gaza right now in the resistance, and an armed resistance, which has not yet been legitimized by a lot of even left-wing critics of Israeli actions. But we're seeing that even that armed resistance is withered. So now the big news, of course, is another sailing vessel going into a part of the Gaza flotilla with the famous Greta Thunberg on board. I did a show, 2010 with local Kevin Nish. He was an activist that was on another of these ships, the Mavi Marmara. Well, Kevin is a brave guy, and he's done a lot of brave things in his time. I don't think anything braver than what happened on that night when the Israelis descended on their ship in the middle of the sea, in the middle of the night, in international waters, with helicopters and speedboats, and shooting at them live rounds as the commandos rappelled down from the helicopters, killing 9 people outright. And there they were, unarmed, no means of resistance, and then were arrested and dragged away to a prison in Israel, the occupied Palestine, and robbed and abused and so forth. So we're wondering if that's going to happen now with Greta Thunberg's little sailboat, where American politicians have already joked, saying, well, I sure hope she knows how to swim, as the boat itself is being harried even as we speak by drones and so forth, and the modern, the new tools of oppression that have developed since we spoke way back when.
Yeah, it's I mean, it's almost as if Israel wants to make itself and is making itself, and perhaps has already made itself, the most hated nation on earth. I mean, what they're doing is just absolutely out of control, and they seem to have no intention of stopping. And, you know, I've always thought that there was a road to peace there, but it always seems to be Israel that's standing in the way of that. And I know a lot of people would disagree with what I'm saying, but that's what I think. And I don't know what the way forward is now. Do you know anything about the issue of Israel funding Hamas to get it started some years ago? Have you ever followed that story?
Oh, that's no conspiracy theory. That goes way back, and Netanyahu actually is involved in that funding. They Israel wanted a foil, a counterforce to
The PLO.
To Fatah. Yes, the Palestinian Liberation. Well, to Fatah was the political outgrowth of the PLO, and Yasser Arafat was its leader. They wanted a counterweight to that. They wanted to divide and rule, so to speak. And so they funded Hamas. They fund a lot of things on both sides. They're funding, for example, right now, the ISIS government, or so-called, in Syria is been supported by Israel in material ways and for a long time. Now it's out in the open. Before it was denied and everything else. But now it's common knowledge. They're also, Israel right now is admitted to funding these gangsters within Gaza. They keep saying, oh, well, the aid that isn't getting to the Palestinian people within Gaza is because it's being stolen by Palestinian gangs. And that's true to a degree. But those gangs, what isn't admitted until recently, were armed and funded by Israel itself. So Israel funded these known gangsters, released some of them from their prisons on October 7th, and sent them in there to create havoc, like they did fund and back and send in ISIS into Syria to create havoc there. The same thing. So their funding of Hamas is pretty common knowledge. If you just do a simple search of it, it's not a conspiracy theory, and it's not unusual for Israel to fund both sides of different conflicts.
And many other countries do exactly the same thing, with the leading one probably being the United States, who's, and I'm not talking about the American people, but the people who run the United States are evil beyond evil. And they've been doing this ever since World War II, one war after another. And now it seems they're turning on the American people themselves and wrecking their country. You mentioned a couple of times that it's common knowledge that Hamas is funded by Israel, but I would bet for most Canadians, I mean, if you're watching the mainstream media, all the newspapers, all the radio, all the television, MSN, it's never mentioned. And this is a huge problem. The amount of censorship that takes place from our media And people accept it. I mean, we are accepting of the idea that the people who run the media, which is big business, will tell us only the part of the story that they want to tell us. And then, of course, we feel a certain way because they control the message. And as long as we accept that, it's a disaster for us. And, I'm not talking about what's going on in Gaza now, which is bad enough. But here in Canada, the housing crisis and the healthcare crisis, I mean, you can make a very good case that those things are deliberate as well, but we'll never hear that in the mainstream media.
Well, yeah, it's evil, all right, but it's a banal sort of evil. I would argue it's business.
Yeah,
That's what it is. It's about business and jerry rigging both sides of conflicts. It's much older than America. The English were fabulous at it, but if you go back to I'm sure to the Romans, you're
yes,
going to find
yes,
the same kind of thing over and over again. You get people. There's a great cartoon of a monarch looking out a window of his castle at a crowd with pitchforks and torches coming up the way, and his advisor says in his ear, "Don't worry, we don't have to fight them. All we have to do is convince the ones with pitchforks that the ones with torches want their pitchforks, and the ones with and the opposite, and they'll fight each other. Don't worry about it."
Yeah.
And that's been going on for a long time. But there is the connection. Canada is connected to Gaza right now. The Canadian government, although our new prime minister denied it during it made up a lie during the election campaign that Canada had stopped military support to Israel. It ordered that support to be stopped, but it didn't stop it. It just rerouted it through the Americans. During the Second World War, the Americans didn't want it to be seen that they were supporting Britain in its fight against Germany for various diplomatic reasons. They funneled their weaponry through Canada. Well, now it's going the other way, where Canada's and the branch plant economy that we're so famous for sends weapons to America that then gets transshipped to Israel. So it's a support by just another means, but the support never stopped. And even now, after all this time and all these uncounted tens of thousands of people killed, we don't know, we probably can't know. You can't get people in our house, the House of Commons, to actually get up and say Israel should be absolutely cut off. We should stop diplomatic relations. We should stop trade. We should do these things that have been called for by activists for years and years to try to rein in this rogue power. I mean, the reason I mentioned at the top, the 2014, the kind of impunity after those 2,200 some odd people were killed by Israel, mostly civilians, mostly unarmed, I mean, vast majority, a war on civilians. Nothing happened. I mean, there was no sanctions against Israel. They just moved on with impunity every 2 years, mowing the grass, as they would say, which means killing a bunch of civilians. And each time they became more emboldened. And in 2018, you may remember the Great March of Return, where there was a peaceful march of civilians saying, okay, well, they say that we should be like Gandhi, so we march up to the wall demanding, we get rights of return to our stolen land. And the people were shot in their hundreds, killed, and had their kneecaps blown out. And doctors were, another guy I interviewed was Dr. Tariq, don't let me gap right now, Lubani. Tariq Lubani is a Palestinian Canadian who was shot in his scrubs, wearing the actual scrubs from the medical center he works at in London, Ontario, shot through both legs by a sniper. They missed his knees. He must have just moved at the right moment, so he wasn't crippled for life. But here he is, a doctor, targeted from, only 100 meters away or something by snipers with high scope rifles and everything else, while he's treating wounded people who were shot, unarmed people. Yeah. Well, now we see that the impunity that followed that and all of the mayhem that was created and the crimes committed then has led to where we are today, where I can't remember now, again with the numbers, but it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,400 medical personnel in Gaza have been killed. I don't know how many more wounded, and their families, because now Israel finds out where a doctor lives, what their address is, by tracking their telephone or other means, and blows them up at home with their entire families. And we've seen this time and time and time again. I mean, it used to be the double tap hits where they would blow up the ambulances responding to other people they'd blown up. Now, but the kind of poisonous impunity that has built up over all of these years since you and I were first talking, about this, even before 2011, back in 2006, has led us to this point. But when you say that that's connected to us, it's connected to us in other ways. I fear that empire always comes home. And the things that are being done to people in Gaza today will be done to people in other places, already being done in Lebanon across the border. They're blowing up apartment buildings full of people saying, oh, we're after bad guys that happen to live there, so we're going to kill their entire family and all their neighbors. This is just a lie to cover the fact that the Israeli regime is practicing erasure, a territorial erasure, for them to move in and create this famed greater Israel. But I apologize, Jack, if I keep saying it's obvious, because I think that's my bias. I haven't watched the mainstream news in years. I don't know what they're talking about, but I do know that it's not true, whatever it is, or half true at best. But in my circles, yes, a lot of this stuff is common knowledge.
And that's an important point about the media. I believed, you grow up in it. It's the media. Of course, they're working for us. And that's the game they play. I think that's the number one thing about a corporate journalist, if I can call them that, which is anybody who works for the corporate-owned media, is they always pretend they're working for us. I mean, that is every day, every minute. But they don't work for us. They work for a corporation, and every word is controlled. If you make a mistake, you may be allowed to make a mistake if you're a corporate journalist. But if you start talking the way you're talking, even though it's true, or you start talking about let's tax the banks or let's get rid of GMO foods, and your career will end the next day. And we accept that as Canadians, and we don't even think about it, as I didn't think about it for most of my life. But now I believe that to be the case.
Well, I believe still that the corporate press can do what they wish. I mean, within the bounds of the law. And it's up to the people to turn them off and say, well, you guys are just lying to us, and I don't want to be lied to. But the state press is another matter. And we've got the CBC in this country. And I don't know if you remember a few years back, their radio reporter, he used to do TV too, but I guess he was the wrong shade. But Duncan McHugh, First Nations guy, mentioned the name Palestine and Palestinians in one of his reports. And there was a furore about it within the CBC, so much so because of the people that lobby the heads of the CBC. But Duncan McHugh, the reporter, was forced to go and make an apologize for saying the P word, for actually in saying that Palestinians were a people with rights and a people that had claim on territory that Israel calls its own. Because, of course, for them, there are no such thing as Palestinians. There's just Arabs that happen to be on the property that they own, and this is the state of the CBC that we pay for, whether you want to or not. You're going to pay for it. Now, so if I'm paying for it, I think I have the right to demand a better standards, at the very least, the standards they profess to believe in and to uphold, which clearly is not the case in the CBC.
No, I'm kind of with those who say let's defund the CBC. And I mean, I supported the CBC my whole life. But when I listen to it now, it's just horrendous. And I don't fault the people who work there, because they've got careers and they've got families, and, they have to support their families. But, the fact is that the Canadian media, and the American even more so probably, you cannot say anything that is not allowed. And we think we have a free press, which is a game.
We celebrate and journalists with the bravery, not only to go into war zones and so forth, but those that have, and there have been some, that stand up, and at the CBC there have been, and call out the CBC, call out the system and its reporting, and they do lose their jobs, and they have to find other ways to support their families. I mean, and that is difficult, and they should be lauded. But at the other hand, for us to just say, okay, well, you have to support your family so you can continue lying to us, when especially about a case like what we're seeing in West Asia and in Palestine, not only in Gaza, but in the West Bank, where there, at this very moment, as you and I are speaking, there's pogroms going on that would curl Hitler's toes, with these settler mobs armed by America. You know, in the States, when you every 10 days or whatever it is, where some guy with a machine gun, a military grade machine gun, starts shooting up a shopping mall or an elementary school or whatever it is, it's a big story, or used to be at least. But those same weapons have been supplied for free to Israel to distribute to these settler populations who are rampaging, even right now, as we talk, through the towns and villages of the West Bank, doing the same thing that's happening in Gaza, killing and abusing and burning down businesses and destroying homes, all as a prelude to some greater horror, I fear, and arresting people by the hundreds. There's thousands in detention without charges, being tortured. The stories of Sadeh Taman, the notorious prison in Israel, the holding tens or thousands of, more than 10,000, but thousands of Gazans, has even made the mainstream news. Like the New York Times has done exposés of this and so forth. You know, but this is this kind of stuff. So if a journalist is going to say, well, you know, I'd like to talk to you about it, but I'm going to spin it this way, and I'm just going to read the press release from the Israeli embassy or whatever. I mean, I wouldn't want to live in their skin. I'll just put it that way.
Yeah. You know, I'd like to move on just briefly to what's happening with Russia and Ukraine, because I think it's kind of the same story. We've been told for 10 years now that Russia is the evil empire again, and they are completely to blame for what's going on in that war. And yet, I mean, if you just look at the actual facts of what happened and why it happened, you can make a very good case. And again, a lot of experts, journalists, professors, researchers, former diplomats, former CIA, you know, they're out there and they're saying the same thing, that Russia was pushed into this by the United States. And, you know, they finally had enough because they would not allow Ukraine to join NATO. And you can certainly make a case that that's a reasonable thing for Russia to want, to not have Ukrainian. And yet all of that is ignored. And we're told that Russia is our enemy. And now it's like Europe is arming itself to fight off the Russian threat. Canada is being told the same thing. Our defense spending has to go up because of the Russian enemy. And I mean, if it's true, okay, but I don't think it's true. I think it's just another story we're being told.
Well, it wasn't just America, but Canada was implicated in the fomenting of the Maidan Square revolution or coup that overthrew the elected government that led to the situation that we're seeing now. Again, in 2014, Canada gave refuge to it wasn't just a spontaneous eruption of peaceful protest in Maidan Square. It was a planned coup, a usurpation of power by force. 100 people were murdered in the square itself by sharpshooters. And some of these hardcore planners took refuge in the week before in the Canadian embassy. Canada has been involved in what went on before the beginning and is still involved. Chrystia Freeland is probably is the most involved possible in this country as a political representative of the government, but she's also very close with the Ukrainian issues, with their heritage and so forth. I speak a lot with John Helmer, and he's over at johnhelmer.net. He's a Russia expert, lived in Russia for decades, has contacts that nobody else has there, knows what's going on. But the story you're being fed is indeed, as you say, it's bosh. this is a joint effort by America and NATO. And America is pulling back right now and hoping that the NATO countries, the other NATO countries, will pick up the slack. They're talking about rearming Germany now. And imagine if you're Russian, what that sounds like to you. To see Russian tanks in the field against Russian soldiers again, in the Ukraine again, to see
German tanks,
fighting Russians in Ukraine. What does that remind you of? The Russians have long memories when perhaps Canadians don't so much so. And so now the Germans have said that they're going to use their Taurus missiles. These are like cruise missiles, long range, guided, sophisticated weaponry to fire deep into Russia. And they're confident Russia's never going to retaliate because it's afraid to retaliate against the West because of its vast military superiority or supposed military superiority. This has been the plan all along. They've been pushing and prodding and poking at Russia for even longer than 2014, killing all the people, killing 15,000 people roughly, mostly civilians, and like 90%, again, killed in the Donbas region between 2014 and 2022 when Russia finally moved in and said, okay, these Russian-speaking minorities populations, we're going to move in to protect them.
Can you explain what the Donbas region is and what it means in relation to this war?
Well, that's in the eastern region of the country. It's
in the eastern region of Ukraine.
Of what is now called Ukraine. Ukraine itself is a creative concept, has gone through different iterations, and I don't have Vladimir Putin's grasp of Russian history to go into it, and he spent hours doing that on a live broadcast. But it's a large Russian dominated region in the east. Imagine Quebec in Canada, and having the French population there and the Canadian, the English Canada population decided that, we're going to make French illegal.
Which is what Ukraine did.
Exactly, and amongst many other measures,
yeah.
So the people said, no, we're going to separate. We don't like the looks of you fascists. We don't like what you're saying about Russian, the Russian people. We don't like what you're saying about our religion. They wanted to close the churches. They wanted to ban the language, change the education system, all of these things. And there was violence against leftists. These guys are outright fascists in Kyiv, as they call it now. So these people said, no, we're going to separate. And so that's what they decided. They voted to separate, as did the people in Crimea. I mean, the Russians didn't go in there with bayonets and that. The people had a plebiscite and overwhelmingly said, no, we don't want anything to do with these guys. These guys are bad news. They've got bad policies. We don't like the direction they're going in. We don't want any part of it. We'll stay with Russia and try to prosper. And of course, that couldn't be allowed. And
so Ukraine began shelling at some point in time the Donbas region.
Yes.
And that was another thing that pushed Russia to...
Well, it was a slow push, in my view. It took them 8 years before Russia did anything militarily, at least overtly, to come to their rescue. I mean, there's the famous Canadian responsibility to protect that Lloyd Axworthy put his name on so many years ago. If ever that applied, it was in this case, but no, it didn't happen. And as I say, something in the neighborhood of 15,000 people, almost entirely civilians, were killed.
In the Donbas region by shelling from Ukraine. Yeah.
By the shelling and fighting, because they raised their own militia armies and started fighting back. And the Russians did support that. But they didn't come in themselves. They were behind the scenes. Not proxy army, but
one of the main events of this war in Ukraine was the Maidan Square event. Can you just talk a little bit about that? What happened with the overthrow of the Ukrainian government at that time, and what happened to then bring Zelensky to power?
Yeah, as I've talked to Ivan Kachadovsky, forgive me, Ivan, if I'm mangling your name. He is the source on what happened in the Maidan. He's at the University of Ottawa. He is a Ukrainian himself, and he's written books and produced films about what happened in the Maidan and done these exhaustive studies about the sniper fire, which is really what sent this from a public demonstration that had some political support on the streets. The government was noted for corruption and so forth.
There was a government at that time that was friendly to Russia.
It was an elected government.
People, elected government. People were upset with it, as people often are with their governments. And this event at the Maidan Square took place and turned into a killing, which led to the overthrow, I think, of that government and the move towards putting Zelensky in power.
Well, Zelensky came, well down the road.
Yeah.
There was others, the Chocolate King being one of them, and a lot of gangsterism and stuff as well in between. This is what I say with these snipers. They were brought in. They were brought in to make sure that it turned to violence. And they were shooting people on both sides.
Both sides, yes.
They were shooting the police. And this is where Kachadovsky, his studies proved that through the angle of attack, where these shots were coming from, and that they were coming from areas that were controlled by the Azov Brigade and their allies, and so they knew which side was responsible. These guys were mostly mercenaries that were brought in that go from trouble zone to trouble zone. It was a set-up affair. They went after the president and made it very public that his life wasn't worth anything, and so he fled the country to the east. He was from the east of the country to begin with, and he ran for his life essentially. And all the while supported by America and NATO and the rest.
You mean what was supported by America and NATO, not the president?
No, the overthrow. The overthrow of
yes.
the president was supported. Yanukovych. Yeah, it was Viktor Yanukovych was the president at the time.
Right.
And so he had even less than 1 year left in his mandate. He had tried to chart a middle course in trade deals between the West and Russia. He thought that he could walk the tightrope and benefit from both sides. And that's what he tried to do. And it seems like a smart thing to do for me, because he was being pressured by the Europeans to move towards Europe, but he wasn't offered a very rich deal. He was basically, give all your farmland to Monsanto and so forth, and then we'll give you some money at exorbitant interest rates through the IMF, and you'll be indebted to us. It wasn't a very good deal. The Russians offered him, if memory serves, something like $12 or $14 billion immediately, like very low or no interest. Refocus your trade with Russia, and they already had very strong trade and energy ties with Russia. It just made a lot more sense. But the West was after Russia, and they were going to use Ukraine as a lever to break it up. And that's what was the plan at the beginning, and that's what's gone on ever since. And that is the plan. And that's where the onus of all of those dead people, and there's a lot of controversy about that too, but on both sides, all of those can be laid at the feet of the White House and in Ottawa too.
And I think I can safely say that there was absolutely no need for that war to ever start. With all the devastation of Ukraine and the loss of infrastructure and the tens of thousands of dead people on both sides and all the trouble, there was never any need for it. And yet here we are, it's crazy.
It made billions. It made billions, Jack, billions. Look at Biden, the Biden family, the crime family, and all the rest. They have made so much money that the farmland in that country is owned now by Bayer Monsanto.
The farmland in Ukraine.
Yes, and other corporations. They own that place. They own all of it. Now they have to make sure that Russia doesn't take it over and nix all of their plans by kicking them out altogether. So they have to win now.
Yeah.
But the people have been. If you see it on video, not on the CBC probably, but you'll see their press gangs in the streets of the cities in Western Ukraine, where these gangs just grab people off the streets or order a pizza and then kidnap the pizza delivery boy and send them to the front with little or no training into the meat grinder, facing hardened, trained, and superior numbered Russian troops. This is the reality. They lowered their recruitment age and raised it at the top end. The old men and children they'll be sending in next, and women too, conscripting. And it was Lindsey Graham, the bloodthirsty American senator, who said that, he was so happy. It was the best money America had ever spent, that they are allowing that the Ukrainians do their fighting for America against Russia, and that they are, quote, willing to fight to the last Ukrainian. Yeah. He actually said that. And he applauded it.
I know. And years ago, Russia wanted to join NATO. They said, let us join NATO. We don't want to be the enemy. We want to be on the inside and do business and trade and everything else. But, here we are. And I mean, once again, I know people here where friendships have ended because one side thinks Russia is terrible and the other side doesn't agree, and friendships end. And
that's torches and pitchforks, Jack.
Yeah.
That's what it is. And they're dividing us, whether it's COVID or Ukraine or Israel or China, anything you can name. The media, they're the guy whispering in the king's ear about the torches and the pitchforks, and they're separating us. They're isolating all of us into little camps, gender-friendly bathrooms, or, you name it. And they'll have us all fighting each other and pick our pockets at the same time.
Chris, we were going to do a 20-minute show. I think we've gone 40. So let's make a plan to do it again.
Okay, Jack.
Okay. Thank you very much. That was great. And do you have any just last comment you'd like to make about anything? I mean,
go to the website and check out some of my stories, not to, for my benefit so much, but for the sources that I talk to, and then wonderful people that have their own channels and shows and everything else that can give you an eye on the world. That you get a real picture of what's going on. Yeah. Turn off the CBC. Turn off all this other stuff. It's balderdash, to put it kindly.
And how do people get to your website?
Well, I'm up on Substack now. So it's Gradio, gradio.substack.com, gradio.substack.com. And then there's other links on there to some of the other stuff I do. But most importantly, as I say, check out the people who come on the show. I put links to their work, and you can provide yourself an education, and then you can look at the world and not go, why is it like this? You think, oh, okay, now I understand why it's like this. Now, why does it have to be like this? And it doesn't have to be like this.
Chris Cook, thank you very much. And it's gradio.substack.com. Chris Cook, thank you so much. Okay. And thanks everybody for watching from Canada, Citizens Forum.